Welcome to the Finance Auditing Committee meeting of Thursday, May 20th, 2021. It is 11:10, and I want to call the meeting to order. This is a teleconference meeting of the Finance Auditing Committee. Before we begin, please note this meeting is being recorded, and Madam Secretary, can you please call the roll?
Thank you. Director Cochran.
Here.
Director Grosboll. Absent. Director Stephanie. Absent. Director Tirio.
Here.
Vice Chair Frederick. Absent. Chair Rabbit.
Here.
And President Parr.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. You have a quorum. You are not a committee of the whole. On the line, you also have Directors Hernandez, Hill, and Snyder. And I'm going to confirm staff.
And Maston as well.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. And Maston.
Yep.
Dennis Mulligan?
Present.
Joe Wire?
Yes.
Ava Bauer is absent. I know that. Kim Manolius?
I'm here. Thanks.
Thank you. Steve Miller?
I'm here, Emma. Good morning.
Thank you. Mona Babauta? Is not with us. Jim Swindler? Not with us as well. Kelly Hopper?
Present.
Present. Thank you. That confirms staff on the line.
Great. Thank you very much. So again, I want to remind everyone that to mute their phones until after staff's presentation, and remember to unmute when we're opening it up for director's discussion. After staff's presentation, I'll be asking for any questions, comments, or concerns. And if there are any, the secretary or I will call on you accordingly. After the discussion, we will ask for any public comment before moving on. The pages of the meeting packet are numbered on the bottom right-hand corner for ease of following along. Madam Secretary, can you please introduce our first item?
Thank you. While you were making those comments, we had Director Fredericks join us, so I wanted to acknowledge that Director Fredericks is now on the line. Thank you. Item number 3 is ratification of previous actions by the Auditor Controller, and that packet of commitments, ratification, and investments before you, and begins on page 5. Leslie Murphy's on the line. Go ahead and start your report.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. We will just jump right in. So flipping ahead to page 12 of your agenda packet, as usual, we'll start with an update to the U.S. Treasury yield curve. So after steepening significantly in March, the yield curve flattened just modestly in April as yields seem to have settled into a new range as investors await further guidance on the future path of interest rates. And the table on the bottom right-hand corner of page 12 really lays that out. You can see very little change in shorter-term obligations, but the yields on 3 to 5 year obligations decreased just a hair during April. But there is still significant value, and we did make some purchases again during the month of 3 and 4 year corporate note obligations because that's really where we saw value during the month of April. So I did think that we would switch gears a little bit this month instead of talking specifically about market dynamics and talk a little bit more about the Federal Reserve. Now, it is important to pay attention to the Federal Reserve because the Fed sets monetary policy and the overnight Fed funds target rate. And that rate essentially dictates the interest rates for your permissible investment universe. So let's go ahead and flip back to page 17 of your agenda packet. What we're showing here is the Fed's official statement that was released immediately following its meeting on April 28th. So the traditionally accepted goal of the Federal Reserve has been to foster maximum employment and 2% in. So looking at the Fed's most recent statement, they acknowledged the strengthening economic activity, they acknowledged improvement in the employment market, and importantly, they acknowledged rising inflation, but they were quick to point out that they feel that that increase in inflation is transitory. Further, they reiterated the goal of achieving an average of 2% inflation, meaning that they will be comfortable allowing inflation to run hotter than 2% for some time in recognition of the fact that inflation has been significantly below 2% for most of the past several years. So we can say it's essentially that the Fed can check those boxes, so it makes sense that the Fed indicated that they expect to see the to keep that Fed funds target rate at its current range of 0 to 0.25%. Additionally, the Fed will continue to make those monthly purchases of U.S. Treasury and federal agency mortgage-backed securities, again, in further efforts to keep those rates low. However, moving on to page 18, so we're looking at the big takeaway here from the Fed's April 28th statement and subsequent commentary from Fed members, both of which supported the idea that the Fed is comfortable with its current operations and gave no hint of policy change. But as my predecessor, Nancy Jones, was fond of saying, as soon as we hit print on these reports, they could be out of date given how quickly things change. So if we were to make an asterisk on this page, it would be the official minutes from that April 28th meeting. Now, those official minutes were just released yesterday, and what really surprised the markets was that the notes indicated that some committee members may consider paring down bond buying efforts at some point during upcoming meetings. Now, this is a departure from the official statement and from comments made by Fed Chair Jerome Powell that the committee isn't even thinking about removing monetary stimulus. So we do think that if the Fed were to start removing that monetary stimulus, the steps would most likely entail, which we're labeling here as sequencing. Step 1, communication. We'd expect very strong communication from the Fed. They certainly don't want to upset the market. Second, we would see a tapering in those monthly asset purchases. And finally, we would see an initial rate increase. So do these early hints from those minutes indicate that we're closer to step 1 than we initially thought? Well, perhaps, or it could simply have been a few committee members thinking aloud about timing, not necessarily a reflection of the committee's actual views. And finally, it's important to remember that this meeting occurred before that disappointing April jobs report, which showed that the economy added only 266,000 jobs in April, falling significantly short of expectations of 1 million new jobs added. So unfortunately, it seems like more questions than answers here, but I do think that the takeaway could be that the Fed might be more in play than previously thought, so we'll be paying very careful attention to further commentary coming out of the Fed. Now, the Fed will be meeting again next month, and that will be a very closely watched meeting, and we will also expect to see updated projection materials next month from the Fed as well. So again, this is something that we're carefully watching. No change in strategy yet. If we do get strong signals and have a strong conviction that rates will start increasing dramatically in the near future, we may shift focus and adopt a more conservative, shorter purchase strategy, but we're not there yet. Again, this is something that we're continuing to watch, and it is something I thought might be interesting to bring to the committee today because we haven't talked about the Fed in some time. That said, we can go ahead and move forward now to page 21 of your agenda packet and take a look at your overall portfolio. Your portfolio does, of course, remain in compliance with both California government code and your investment policy, and it remains well diversified by both sector and issuer. Again, during the month of April, we made some additional purchases of high-quality corporate notes with 3+ years to maturity because that's where we saw value during the month. But as always, while we do look for opportunities to increase the earnings potential of the district's portfolio, our number 1 and number 2 priorities will always be to maintain the safety and the liquidity of your holdings with us. And that is the end of my prepared comments this morning.
Great, Ms. Murphy, thank you so much for that. We appreciate your presentation as always. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns on this item?
Quick question, Director Terrio.
Go ahead, Director Terrio.
Thank you. Ms. Murphy, on a slide you went past on page 16 of our packet, there is a note that employed workers face stagnating wages. I can guess at the cause of that, if we're thinking in terms of cause and effect. What are some of the economic effects of that fact?
Yeah, that's a good question, and this is something that we've been watching. You know, if you're looking at the chart on the bottom half of the page, this chart's share of labor compensation in overall GDP for the past several decades, dating back to the 1950s, and you can see we're far short of where we were then. I think really what we see in terms of the economic effect kind of harkens back to that idea of the K-shaped recovery. And this idea that we're seeing an increasing disparity in wages and in income and in general wealth levels between the very wealthy and, you know, the rest of the population. And I think that's something that is expected to be addressed. I know one of the elements that, you know, that's being thrown around is increasing the federal minimum wage, which certainly I think would help to improve the picture for employed workers. And it also is worth noting that in the month of April, average hourly earnings increased by 0.7% to a total average hourly wage rate of $30.17. So we do have some ways to go, but this is something that is concerning and that policymakers are looking at. In the near term, you know, we are expecting to see the American Families Act, which could provide direct support to American families. So it's something that we're going to keep watching and keep looking at. I think longer term, the impact could be an additional widening of that wage gap if it's not corrected.
Director Terrio, this is Joe. The other important points which you may already be aware of is that considering our economy is driven by over 70% by consumption, wages, higher wages to wage earning employees tend to drive consumption, which tends to drive GDP. Wage income tends to be spent by and large almost completely on various consumption items, and only a little bit of it is actually saved. So by increasing wages there would be an opportunity to increase GDP and the turnover of money. So that's one reason the economists are interested in seeing that go up.
Thank you for that,
Thank
Joe.
you.
Appreciate it.
That was approximately my understanding. Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns for Ms. Murphy? Hearing none, again, thank you so much, Leslie, for the presentation. Always appreciated. And that concludes the discussion on this item. Before we take our vote, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this particular item?
We have no speakers on this item.
Great. Could I have a motion to accept this, please?
I'll also move.
Second.
And I'll look to the secretary if she got those names. And if so,
I did. I got those. Thank you. We have a first from Director Cochran and a second from the Vice Chair, Fredericks, starting with Director Cochran.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Grosboll. Absent. Director Stephanie. Absent. Director Terrio.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Chair Fredericks.
Yes.
Yes. Chair Rabbit.
Aye.
Aye. And President Parr.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 6. And since there are no actions to authorize for items number 4 or 5, item 6 is to authorize execution of the Fourth Amendment to contract number 2019 D067, Interim Temporary Staffing Services with Techie Brains, Inc. Yep, Techie Brains, Inc. and related capital budget increase. The staff report begins on page 29, and Auditor Controller Joe Wire will present this report. Joe, please begin your report.
Thank you very much, and to the chair and the members of the committee and the board. The item before you is to support the continued smooth working of Kronos, which is our timekeeping scheduling leave management system. You have two actions. One is to amend the contract with Techie Brains, as mentioned, for $100,000, and the other action is to increase the capital budget by $100,000. The Kronos system is one that is, because of the nature of the type of business it's in, it's keeping track of timekeeping and scheduling. that the regulatory framework, state, local, and federal, is continually changing, and because the district has 20 plus bargaining units, those continually change on small pieces, and all of that has to be incorporated into the Kronos system in order to collect the time correctly and to compensate our employees correctly. So by having these services available, we are able to make those updates, which occur almost not every pay period, but almost every other pay period. We're putting some data or another in due to some change or another in the system that allows us to do it quickly, efficiently, and keep the payrolls moving smoothly. Also in this contract, the expertise that we have built up in the staff member who works through Techie Brains, we are having that person document their expertise, and we'll be transferring that and have been in the process of transferring that to a full-time district employee who will be employed in the IS division of the district in the future. If I have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Wire. Are there any other questions from my colleagues?
Director Maston, I have a question.
Please go ahead, Director Maston.
Thank you. This amendment, the dollar amount, seems much larger than the other amendments, and I was curious as to why that might be. And also, is this training process taking longer than anticipated? And if so, why might that be?
Thank you very much for the question. The amount is slightly larger, and I think this is the first time we've come to the board with this, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to get both the work done that we need to do on the system and the documentation, which will take more hours, and the training. So we wanted to make sure we had sufficient resources to do that. Secondly, the transfer of the knowledge is moving along at the pace we expected for the most part. However, the transfer has been hampered by the district's inability to recruit and retain a payroll manager. We've had very difficulty. I've been doing it for almost 2 years now. COVID hasn't helped. We were fortunate to find one individual and then lost them. And now we're searching for someone else. So the reason that is pertinent to this is that we are training and transferring an individual from payroll to move them over to IS to handle this system going forward, along with other HRIS duties in the IS department. And we can't make that transfer until we can get another body into payroll in order to continue to pay. Payroll is one of your bedrock systems in any organization. We have to make it every 2 weeks. We have 2 payrolls every 2 weeks, another one monthly. So that part has been delayed.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks. Any other questions? Not hearing any other questions. That concludes discussion on this item. Before we take our vote, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak?
We have no speakers on this item.
Great. Can we have a motion to approve this particular item?
So moved, Director Babbitt.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. And Madam Secretary, can you please do the roll?
Thank you. We're voting on item number 6, and with the first from Director Terrio and the second from Director Cochran, starting with Director Cochran.
Yes.
Yes. Director Grosboll. Absent. Director Stephanie. Absent. Director Terrio.
Yes.
Yes. Vice Chair Fredericks.
Yes.
Yes. Chair Rabbit.
Aye.
Aye. And President Parr.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you very much. And I apologize. I've always been an aye person, and I just need to keep my streak going of about 15 years. So thank you for the indulgence. We'll move on to item number 7, to authorize execution of an extension to the commercial paper line of credit agreement with JP Morgan Chase Bank. The staff report begins on page 31, and we have Joe Wire to present this report as well. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. And I failed to say last time, I will try to keep these introductions to the items short. There's a lot of details in the items. I do know we still have the budget in front of us, and I know it's been a long day already. So, but thank you for asking questions, and please continue to do that. So on this particular item, this is the commercial banking program. The district has had it in place for almost 20 years now. It is necessary for the district to maintain a line of credit in order to fulfill our obligation to our bond, in this case, commercial paper holders, if for some reason the district were unable to make a principal or an interest payment. In this case, JP Morgan would step in and make those payments for us. And that's the safety we're buying. The promise we made to the bond holding public is called the indenture, and we made that promise 20 years ago, and we have kept this line of credit going ever since. So why JP Morgan? We have been with JP Morgan the entire time. They have one of the highest ratings for a bank in this particular business. We've used PFM, our financial advisor, to look at the market for us, get the market rates, and then we negotiate with JP Morgan. They have come in at a market rate for this, and in this particular arrangement, they have done so for a next 2-year period. So we have looked, and the recommendation is to sign with JP Morgan for 2 years at 52 basis points, which is approximately a 35% decrease from last year, or about $200,000 a year less from last year. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wire. Are there any questions?
Director Maston has a quick question.
Please go ahead.
Yep. What is the size of the line of credit, and have we ever used it?
No, we have never used it, and of course we obviously never intend to use it. The district not only does it intend to pay its bondholders regularly, and it has for over 20 years, but we have 2 specialized reserves set aside for this, which can only be used for this purposes. So even before we would ever get to JP Morgan, we would use those reserves, and those reserves could cover interest payments for years on the debt. And they were set up as part of the indenture also. The overall JP Morgan is on our debt outstanding is $61 million, and due to some safety precaution that was built into the indenture when it was put out years ago, the amount that JP Morgan was willing to cover is, I think, $76 million, if I have it correct.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Not hearing any other questions at this time. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this particular item?
We have no one wishing to speak on this item.
We have no further discussion. No one from the public. Can I have a motion on this item?
Also move item number 7.
Second.
We have a motion. Second, Madam Secretary, can you please do the roll?
Thank you. Voting on item number 7 with Director Cochran starting.
Yes.
Yes. Director Grosboll? Absent. Director Stephanie? Absent. Director Theriault?
Yes.
Yes. Vice Chair Fredericks?
Yes.
Yes. Chair Rabbit?
Aye.
Aye. And President Barr?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. That motion passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you all very much. Next on our agenda is item number 8, to approve actions relative to the award of contract 2021 B041 Golden Gate Bridge Interim Toll Collection System Replacement to P Square Solutions, LLC. The staff report is on page 33, and Joe Wire will also present this report. Go ahead, Joe.
Again, thank you, and thanks to the members. In front of you is the replacement for the interim toll collection system. This is a lanes-based system that would replace the lanes-based system we have today as we await eventually the installation of the gantry and a gantry-based system. The reason for the need for this is due to the slow degradation, essentially, of the capabilities of our current system. It is still doing a very good job, but we do not want it not to do a very good job or be here holding sort of the basket if something were to happen. It is a very significantly old system, and getting replacement parts has then put our electricians into looking for them on eBay. So it's clearly something that we've known we need to do. As you may obviously remember, we asked to replace this system 2 years ago. We have put out a contract with the CAPS system to do so. We have worked with them for 2 years to get this system out, and that has not come to success. Therefore, we are moving that contract from them to P Square, who you have here. This particular option was selected because it maintains the basic design and subcontractor for the lanes-based system that was in the original CAPS contract, so we don't have to do that work over again. And then we're laying on top of that P Square, which is a software provider, which would tie that lanes-based system into our collect the data and be able to tie it into our customer service center downstream in order to deal with our customers. There are a number of actions that you're being asked to approve here. One is to authorize a contract with P Square for approximately $3.5 million. The second would be to authorize a maintenance up to 6 years of maintenance. It is not our expectation that we'll be maintaining the system necessarily for 6 years. The gantry system will come before that, but it is there in case we were to need it, to have these rates already negotiated. Would authorize the second request is to authorize the general manager to pay for project work that's already been performed, and that would be to the subcontractor that we've already that's already been working on this in our original agreement. And then the next would be to establish a contingency for the implementation of approximately 10%, which is $350,000 approximately. And last would be to authorize a budget adjustment. In the original budget, which is 6 years old now, from 2015, of approximately $3 million. The other last bit is that although we did not have DVE participation in our original agreement, this particular one has a 43% DVE participation. Now I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Joe, for that. Are there questions on this particular contract?
Director Maston, again, my apologies.
No,
for clarification. On page 33, Joe, 1B, is it $4+ million for maintenance and then $2+ million for support services for 3 years? Is that what B says?
The 4.7 million is a complete 6 years, and the 2.4 is the first 3 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Are there any other questions of Joe on this item? I'm not hearing any, so is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item?
We do not have any speakers for this item.
Okay, with that, can I have a motion to approve agenda item number 8?
So moved.
Also moved.
Madam Secretary, I think we have a motion and a second in there, and if you can please do a roll call vote.
Thank you. I have a first from Director Terrio and a second from Director Cochran, starting with Director Cochran.
Yes.
Yes. Director Bridgepole, absent. Director Stephanie, absent. Director Terrio?
So Director Abbott doesn't feel lonely, I'll say aye.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Fredericks?
I'll stick with a yes.
Thank you. Chair Rabbit?
Aye.
And President
For the record, that nay.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We'll move on to item number 9, and that's to approve actions relative to the award of contract 2021D005, third-party administrator for workers' compensation claims and auxiliary services to Athens administrators. A revised staff report was sent on Tuesday and labeled as page 37. Deputy General Manager of Administration and Development, Kelly Hopper, is on the line to present this report. Kelly, can you go ahead, please?
Thank you, Chair Rabbit, and good morning. I am bringing an item to you this morning to approve the award of a contract to Athens administrators for a third-party administrator work for our workers' compensation and ancillary services. The agreement would be to provide workers' comp claim management administration in an amount not to exceed $1,020,609 for a 3-year base term contract. The recommendation also includes 2 one-year options to be exercised at the general manager's discretion. And finally, the recommendation also includes authorization to allow certain ancillary services, such as our workers' comp medical case utilization management work, our utilization reviews, our medical provider network, and our bill reviews at the rates that are set forth in the proposal on an as-needed basis. During the RFP process, the district received 5 proposals from potential vendors. There was a selection process, and through the selection process, the selection committee reviewed the proposals, interviewed the firms, and ultimately ended up recommending Athens. Athens is very familiar with the district operations, and they bring a level of experience and familiarity with our maritime requirements, our very popular alternative dispute resolution process, which we have currently in place for our bus operators, as well as our mechanics at the district, and then also some various specialties that are associated with particular bargaining units here at the district. Again, the total cost for these services for a 3-year term and 2 one-year options would not exceed $1,791,939. And that concludes my report. I'm available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hopper. Appreciate that very much. Are there any questions on this particular item? Not hearing any out there. I'm sorry, was that a question?
I think that was an echo.
Okay, I think we're good then. And I'll ask if there's anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item.
We do not have a speaker on this item.
Great, I'll bring it back to the committee and ask if there's a motion to approve item number 9.
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second, and I'll ask Madam Secretary to please call the roll.
Thank you. We are voting on item number 9, starting with Director Cochran.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Grosboll. Absent. Director Stephanie. Absent. Director Theriault.
Aye again.
Aye again. Vice Chair Fredericks.
Yes.
Yes. Chair Rabbit.
Aye.
Aye. And President Carr.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. The ayes have it unanimously.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you, Kelly, for that report. We'll move on to item number 10, the status report on the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget. A brief staff report is found on page 41, and we'll go back to Joe Wire to give this report.
Thank you very much to the chair and the board and committee members. If we could just quickly turn to page 43, and that is the table. I'll just point out the areas where things have changed. I mean, the bottom line is still the same. The district will achieve a balanced budget thanks to the federal resources that have been provided it and the work that's been done by the board and staff to keep our expenses as low as possible. The pieces that have changed, if you look at line 12 on page 43, we've updated the tolls in transit for actual conditions, things that have happened so far. And of course, they're a little bit below our projections. We were obviously slightly optimistic, but not too much. The tolls in transit has been slightly lower, and so that, but that will be made up as we mentioned by federal funding. Line 13 is the significant change that we put in this time because we were able to fine tooth examine the detail that went into your proposed budget, which we'll be talking about next. We were able to come up with a better estimate of the success that the staff has had and the board has had in reducing overall expenses at the district. And so that $8 million that you see put in there is our projected understanding of where our final expenses are going to end up this fiscal year on June 30th of 2021. So that reduces our need for federal spending in this year and that federal revenue in this year, and that will move what we're calling CRISA Tranche 2 or CRISA funding into next year. And we will discuss that more in the budget item that follows this. That'll help offset the need for revenue, additional revenue next year. The tables and graphs that follow are updated for this information that I just mentioned. So but they are the same that you've seen before otherwise. So with that, I'll leave it open if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate that. Any questions on this particular item? Not hearing any, and I do appreciate the format and the information that's provided. I think it's great that we can track it in this way, especially given the times. So very much appreciated that that you put that together that way going forward. So if there is no questions from the committee, I'll see if there's anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item.
Thank you. We do have one speaker on this item, and in a second, I'm going to connect the call and introduce Mr. Weinstein. Hello, Shane, are you there?
I am.
Thank you. Go ahead with your public comment there on this one.
Okay. Good morning, directors. Shane Weinstein, president of the ATU. I just kind of wanted to understand and clarify. There were a couple of things that have been said in the recent past by the general manager and also by Chair Rabbit, who also is on the Program and Allocations Committee at the MTC. What I'm going to start with is saying that the MTC is holding on to $1.67 billion in federal funding that's supposed to be used for stimulus right now, not for anything going projects later on, but for stimulus for right now to put buses back on the road. And we have ghosted complete towns. We have ghosted Mill Valley. We have obviously, as you heard in the Transportation Committee, ghosted the 92. If you're living on the west side of San Francisco, you got to go all the way over to Van Ness or find your way down to Lombard somewhere. So AC Transit's board, as well as Muni, have put together two budget scenarios. One with an estimated how much ARP funding they're going to be needed, and also to propose a list of priorities on how that ARP funding is going to be spent. So for clarification, back in the April Program and Allocations Committee, Chair Rabbit and also the chair of that committee said, and I quote, this is from the transcript, "I can tell you that no, we're not looking for ARP to balance our budget in the next fiscal year. That would be beyond. But what is being reported to you by the general manager, even as of, I believe, the last meeting, was that at the staffing levels that we're at right now, we would be running out of money by December." So it's kind of confusing. I know he said later, Director Rabbit said later, and again, as for my agency that I'm on, we had 108% of our budget restored. So we're not looking to use that money. So I don't know which way to go with it. Transit workers have been working through this pandemic without a raise, without hazard pay, and dealing with hiring freezes. So it's insulting that there's a pot of money sitting there, still unused, as operators continue to be praised for being essential workers without any significant change in pay. And right now you have the coalition who has taken a change in medical benefits, and now they are waiting on a raise that they so deserve, and so does the bus division is going to be going into bargaining as well. So, we need to reward the workers for what they've done, not just tell them we're grateful for you being an essential worker, but we need to go out there and advocate to get that money so that we can put it in these proposed budgets. That's about it. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Is there any other members of the public wishing to speak?
We have no other speakers.
Great, I'll bring it back to the board then. I'll just say that just to the extent the ARP funding beyond the CRRSA funds restored current fiscal year budgets, the ARP is envisioned to be the last of the three tranches of federal support for public transit. And I know that MTC is anticipated or working through a series of principles and a series of distribution models, methodologies to make sure that we address those agencies that are most impacted, and that distribution model is going to be fair and equitable and carry on for perhaps more than a single fiscal year going forward until ridership returns. I think that's the intent, and that's where we're going. So with that, I'll bring it back to the board if there's any other questions, and if not, can we get a motion on this particular item?
Well, we actually don't need to take a motion. It was an informational item, so
there you go.
We can move on to the next.
All right. So then we are going to move on then to item number 11, which is the initial presentation of the proposed fiscal year 2021-2022 operating and capital budget. The staff report starts on page 51 of the budget book, and the budget book was provided separate from the packet. And again, Joe Wire, can you please start your report?
Thank you very much to the chair and to the committee members and the board members present. What you have is two things, as was mentioned. You have the staff report and the budget, and it was attached. As always, I am going to use the budget, so please open that attachment. It has page numbers at the bottom, right-hand corner of every page, and I'll be referring to those as we go through this. I will clearly hit the various top highlights as we go through, and there's a lot of information in the several hundred pages that you have in front of you. So open to questions now, but just to remember that we will have this on the agenda for June Finance Committee time, and we'll make time for questions then also, and then it's scheduled to go to the full board for approval at your June meeting. So that's sort of the process by which we'll go through. So first, I will mention that this budget is somewhat similar to the last one that you saw a year ago, and we will continue, as Chair Rabbit mentioned, we will continue that status report item that we just talked about, except for it won't be the status report on the 1920, it'll be the status on the 2021, it'll be the status report on the 21-22 budget, because we'll need to do the same checks and balances to make sure that we achieve our goals through the year, and to make sure that the district is able to balance its budget. This one will point out, does also include the need for either the district to receive additional federal funding, which is mentioned, is expected. But if not, that the district would need to make some very significant choices in order to balance its budget if for some reason we weren't able to. And the budget is written in that manner. So if we could turn to the budget item itself, and if you have the attachment open on your computer, the first page is a cover page, and then right after that is where we'll start. And this is the big thank you page. You cannot produce a book without a lot of people working, and it really is a book of several hundred pages worth of material. The staff mentioned here, first of all, I'll say it is an award-winning, again, every year from the GFOA. The staff led by Jennifer and Amy and my budget and capital divisions, and then their staff, Lenny, Daniel, and Clifford, and Midria, put together the budget book itself. But the work is based on all the information that's provided by your officers, deputy general managers, and staff, and I really appreciate the way they've worked as a nice team with my staff in order to get this document to you and to the public so that people can measure and discuss what we're actually doing out each year. With that, turning to page 9, again, bottom right-hand corner of your pages, you'll see the page numbers. That's the general manager's message, and I won't go through it all, but it is a nice 2-page summary of the year that we faced, the very difficult financial decisions that we faced, the effort that's been made to balance the budget, and then how we're approaching next year. And I think it sums it up pretty well. I will hit those same topics in the budget document itself, because of course this reflects clearly the budget document in it. So turning on page 17, we'll first start with our new section of our budget that we put in first time last year, which is essentially the impact of COVID. It is still the elephant in the room, gigantic. We did not think we would be here necessarily last year when we had this exact same conversation again over the phone. we thought that COVID would be winding down quicker and that we would be closer to normal by now. As we all know, that didn't work out that way. It does look like COVID, at least in the United States, is winding down, or especially here in the Bay Area, and that's a very good sign. But things have not returned to normal at all, and we're not budgeting for that, and this budget doesn't assume they will be normal either. But it does assume they will get better, and I think that's an important part. So page 17 just reminds everybody that COVID hit us and dropped our primary sources of revenue, and we are a fee-based agency. That means we charge a fee for the service we provide, and so if our customers don't come to use our services, they don't pay us a fee, and we don't have money. It's just really simple. There's no other money flowing in that comes because people exist, like tax money or other things that has a slightly different way of approaching. Not that doesn't have its ups and downs and under other times of economic activity. So when the bridge traffic dropped 70%, transit, bus went down 88 and ferry went down 99%, that dried up our revenue extremely fast. Of course, it did bounce back a little bit in bridge especially, which was very fortunate for us because that's where we make the bulk of our resources, and allowed us to continue through the year. But it was really the $111 million that we've received from the federal government that allowed us to continue the service levels that we have and to maintain our staffing levels. The district, by the end of this fiscal year, is projected to spend about 86 of that 111 million, and will carry over about 25 million into next year. And that's CRISA Tranche 2 money that will be able to help fund the budget that you have in front of you. And we will talk directly about that as we go forward. Next, I'd have you look at page 21. And as I say this, feel free to stop me if you have a particular thing, or just note it, and you can come back to it at the end. Either way, page 21. This section looks at bridge, then bus and ferry. The fee-for-service aspect of it. In other words, how are our customers doing, and then how much therefore are we getting from them to provide them with the service. The middle box in the bridge talks about the bridge revenues and expenses. Bridge is expected to run at 100% as it has been. And when I say run at 100%, it means we expect to expend the resources to maintain the bridge like we would, like we always have. It doesn't allow us to cut back if we want to keep the bridge up, even though the traffic itself, of course, has dropped. We'll talk about that. So those expenses continue to grow year after year, and that's in the middle line of that chart. The bottom line is the surplus revenue, or the revenue that we use to subsidize transit, that's being produced. And of course, back in 1920, it was almost $55 million. And when we look at what we expect in 21-22, we're expecting about $25 million. So that's $30 million less that we won't have to fund on transit, to spend other things. And we'll talk about those impacts as we go forward. Turning the page to page 22, you'll see a graph, and then on page 23 is a sister graph to them. And that's important about those. We have one of these for each of our bridge, bus, and ferry. What you're seeing in the top line there is a pre-COVID look at our traffic. So you got to get a feel for that. If you have a color, that's the red red-orange bar going across with all those dots. That's pre-COVID. Then the blue one, you see the COVID year hit. That's last year. Hit in March, dropped dramatically downward, and then started to rise, bounce back in the summer of last year, and then flattened out. It's been very flat. And then as you go, the third line you see is a green one, and that starts over on the left, and that's this year. And you can see it's starting to inch up a little bit this spring, and we appreciate that. It's gotten back to its highest level it has been since COVID. But you can tell that green line, even though it's inched up, is still quite a bit from where it used to be. And that's the nut there. That's the problem we've been dealing with. And that's our major funding source for transit, is that big empty spot. That chart on page 22 is our bridge traffic, and obviously the one on page 23 is revenue, and it looks almost exactly the same. They mirror each other, of course. we get our revenue from our patrons. And you can see that difference between the green and red line as we look at it is what we're expecting to have to bridge in order to keep our services at the level we expect. What this budget predicts is that green line will continue on its slight rise as it goes through the year, but not that it would maintain and be able to achieve the levels that it had achieved in pre-COVID days as of yet. That's talked about on page 24. Top chart, top set of table. There's some grayed out lines at the bottom of each of those sections of that top table. And what essentially the budget assumes essentially that we'll be about 70% of normal when we hit the new fiscal year. Hopefully we'll be a little bit greater. And then we'll climb gradually up into the middle 70s by the end of the year. Again, hopefully we'll do better, but this is a cautious approach to the new fiscal year. Next, we'll take a look at what's happening in bus, and that would be page 26. Again, you'll see on page 26 that familiar table that we looked at for bridge, although it's a little bit larger for bus, where we talk about the estimated expenses and revenues. That's the top of the table and the bottom of the page. First, we have the revenues, and then we have the expenses. Expenses we expect to increase, and that's because the district is budgeting, or at least allowing the budget to be able to support a much higher level of service, improve, to boost service from approximately 50% of normal pre-COVID now up to say 75% of pre-COVID as the year moves on. That, of course, would be done as customers return to the district. If you look down at the expense number, which is the second row on that table at the bottom of the page, you can see it grows. Well, first it fell from 98 to 92 and from the first year to the second year in 2021, and then up to 101 in 21-22 in this proposed budget. What you see below that in the box below is the one-time money, and that's the federal funds that we've had in order to support the bus division. The subtotal at the bottom of that one-time money being CARES, CRISA Tranche 1, CRISA Tranche 2, and in our particular case, the toll carryover. That carryover occurred because CARES money back in 1920 offset some toll money that we would have spent, and so we moved that money over to 21-22 and spent it in 21-22. So the one-time money equaled, $31 million in 1920, $39 million in 21-22, and right now we have almost $16 million already, and that's CRISA money being moved over. Of course, the amount left over is what we'll have to fill either with ARPA money if it's available, or if not, with changes to our other revenues or expenses. Turning to page 27, that's again that from on the bottom of the page, that is that chart that we showed you, a graph we showed you also for the bridge division, and this one talks about bus ridership. Again, the top line is pre-COVID bus ridership. The blue line represents the significant drop that occurred for COVID, and then what is a very flat bus patronage since then. It increased a little bit up into the low 20% range and has essentially maintained there ever since. And even if you move into the new year, which is the green line, it's gone up slightly, a little bit more, but still at a low level. Revenues on the next page, that's page 28. Revenues look pretty much the same. Again, fee for service. So if we don't have the passengers, we don't get the revenue from the passengers. And you can see that the COVID line, the pre-COVID line, and then you have the big drop, the last year's, and then slight increase coming into this year. The district assumes that increase will start to ramp up when in this budget, and that's on page 29. Again, if you take that chart in the middle of the page, there's the grayed in area at the bottom of each section of that chart, which tells you the percentage of pre-COVID bus patronage we're projecting in this budget, starting out around 25% in July, and then rising through the year to over 60%. of our original bus passengers. That gives the assumption that takes in the assumption that the shelter-in-place rules will be picked up this summer and changed, and then people will gradually start commuting back into the city, which is our main bread and butter for our commute service. Next, we'll turn to page 30 and take a look at the same type of data for the Ferry Division. In Ferry Division, we also make the expense assumption that expenses will grow, and that's at that chart, that table at the bottom of the page, a second line, from 34 million last year to 43 million next year. And that's assuming that service could be expanded from about 25% of pre-COVID today to, say, 2/3 of pre-COVID, about 65% of pre-COVID, by the end of the year, to handle return of passengers. Again, that table at the bottom of the page shows you the significant amount of one-time money that has been used to fund the ferry system. Over in 1920, it was 12 million. 2021, it was 21 million, and we're got 9 million scheduled so far, but we'll need significantly more if we're to balance that budget. Turning to page 31, you'll see the ridership chart. A very significant ridership change occurred. You can see the pre-COVID line on top, the significant COVID drop, and then it's just very, very flat line at the bottom, which represents ferry patrons throughout the last year. And of course, that the green line on the left-hand side represents this year, and it stays about the same. We've seen a slight increase in the last weeks, and that's been very positive. This budget assumes that we would get a significant increase, and that's on page 33. If you look at page 33, the table there, similar to the one for bridge and the one for bus. The grayed-in area represents that we're got the assumption that in July, ferry patrons will be up about 10% of normal, pre-COVID normal, and that over the course of the year, we would get all the way up to half of pre-COVID normal, 50% of pre-COVID normal. So that would be bringing back a lot of our former passengers in order to achieve that goal. The system would have the ability to provide the service, and that these passengers would return. Now, if you add all those up and take a look at the district as a whole, that's on page 36. So that's a couple pages past where we are right now. There's a revenue expense table for the entire district. And similar setup to what it was before. We have on the far left-hand side of that table at the top of the page is the final proposed budget. You see, it looks like to have $160 million in revenues that it would produce, $235 million in expenses, essentially. That's a $74 million shortfall. We already have $25 million, we believe, in CRISA money that'll be able to flow over. It depends on, of course, the exact amount that gets spent in this last year. And that would leave us about $49 million short. And that's the way the budget is built from now on. There is a high expectation that ARPA funding, as has been mentioned, will be able to fill that shortfall in budget. If not, then the district board would be, and staff and board would be faced with some difficult decisions going in throughout the year. All right, so those are the COVID impacts. And as I said, please feel free to stop me if you have any questions, or we can take them at the end. So I'll keep going and on to page 39, which is take a look at our overall financial. So we'll look at just a short stop in our overall finances, and then a short overview of the operating and capital budget. Page 39 has in the middle of the page sort of lists out the budget and those bullet points, and that's essentially what I just went over for the operating budget, $160 million in the first bullet in expenditures and $235 million in revenues, resulting in the $74 million deficit, and then how we would have to meet that with the CRISA and hopefully the ARPA funding. And then the bottom two bullets represent the capital budget, which we'll talk about it in a second. $26 million in revenues and $48 million in expenditures, and that would use about $22 million from the district's reserves for capital projects, which is what those reserves, of course, have been set aside for, so that's been expected and planned to do that. If we turn to page 41, there's two tables and two pie charts to kind of give you a sense of the revenues and expenses in a graphic form. Tolls continue to make up the largest share of our revenues, and of course, to the extent that traffic returns to the bridge, that would make our financial situation much more stable. They make up approximately 40% of all of our revenue coming in, including this particular pie charts cover both capital and operating for the budget year, so it's a full look at everything. Fares, are about a third of what they normally are at $12 million and represent a small slice, 4%. Then we have government grants, both operating and capital, and those are not the one-time government grants necessarily, although some of the capital ones are, but they tend to be the grants that we've been accruing over the years, both for operating and capital. And then the Marine contract and the money $22 million we're using from the capital reserves to help fund our capital projects. And then the bottom two are what we would call the bottom one, the CRISA Tranche 2, $25 million, clearly one-time money for the COVID situation. And the last is the $49 million that we need, which we are looking to get support from the ARPA funding to support that. If not, we would have to be looking to revenues and expenses. And that represents the piece of pie at the top of the chart that is clear. That's the piece we'd be looking to fill if the ARPA money does not come through. On the bottom, you've got a pie chart of where the money is spent. The lion's share is still in transit, although bridge capital and makes the bridge share about 45% of our budget. Let's take a look at that. If you can turn to page 43. Given that the COVID caused a drop in our patronage on both bridge, bus, and ferry, really highlights the funding and how we fund our transit system. Because the model that was put together in the 1960-1970 that allowed the district to fund transit with surplus toll revenue, subsidized transit, has worked wonderfully. And this is the first time it really hit a really rough patch. And that's because we lost bridge patrons, of course, and of course bus and ferry patrons. So this table that we put in bears more significance than even it does in past years. If you look at the table itself, the first line is the Bridgepole Subsidy for bus and ferry division and total transit, both for the year that's about to complete, 2021, and then the right-hand side is for next year, 21-22. That Bridgepole Subsidy was about 23% last year, the year that's closing, and it's expected to be about 17% next year. Then the passenger fares made up about 3% last year, go up to about 8% because, as we're saying, we're expecting more passengers next year. Other revenue, those are other sources of revenue we have here at the district. Normal operating revenues about the same. Government grants, those are the operating grants, TDA and SDA and RM2 that we get, about the same percentages. And then we get into the one-time funding. Last year, one-time funding accounted or will account for about 48% of our funding. It could edge a little bit closer to 50 depending on how the year plays out. So essentially, the transit system was funded almost half on these one-time federal grants. Next year, we're expecting about the same thing. Right now, it's budgeted about 52%. Give or take a few percentage points, it'll probably end up in about that half range. And that's, of course, if we're able to get that bottom corner slice of 34%, future changes in expenses and revenues to be future revenues in ARPA funding. Next would be to turn to page 46. Page 46, we'll take a look at our reserves. Because the district has been able to balance its budget, the reserves remain healthy. We have used our emergency reserve. We are, in fact, using it as I speak to fund we've used our emergency reserve to fund shortfalls as we wait for federal funding to kick in. So right now we're waiting for the second tranche of CRISA to arrive. We have all of our paperwork done. It's all been approved. It'll be on its way in. But for the last month and a half, we've been spending reserves, and then we will use that CRISA second tranche to pay back those reserves. So if you look at this chart, you can see the reserves continue to grow. And at the bottom of the paragraph at the bottom, we explain sort of how that's done. The operating budget, we expect to contribute about $33 million to reserves through capital contribution and depreciation. And we expect that that will spend about $22 million if the budget is able to be balanced, and that would leave in reserves going by at least the $11 million that we have situated in that last paragraph. So the reserves are healthy, and that gives you a good sense that the district is remaining financially healthy. However, if you turn to page 48, the table at the top, the graph at the top, shows that although the reserves look healthy, we are expected to allocate those reserves to significant capital projects over the next 2 years. They won't spend out right away because capital projects takes a number of years to spend out, but the bottom line on that graph shows how quickly we expect to allocate those funds into large multi-year capital projects. By 2023, expect to have allocated them all. Then, of course, in the meantime, we will be raising future dollars for future capital projects through future balanced budgets. That is important to us to continue to do so. Next, we turn to page 50, and this is just for me to mention that each year we talk about the long-term strategic planning here at the district. We were, right before COVID hit, we, as an institution, we're going to start that process again. That has been delayed in order to focus on the immediate, what is a crisis at hand, and to keep the financial operations of this organization running as we're going forward. That process clearly will start up again as things settle down, hopefully in the next 6 to 12 months. It's just what it says in that section. With that, I'd like to move from the financials of the district, financial health, into the operating and capital budget, just for a quick view of those. So with that, if you could turn to page 61. That's your operating budget summary. Again, two tables and 2 pie charts. So this is just operating budget now. Pretty much represents the same thing that you saw before, but now we're not looking at the capital budget involved. It's just the operating side. The numbers on the right, and then you have the pie slices on the numbers on the left, pie slices on the right. Tolls we're expecting to increase in this budget, grow, as I mentioned in the COVID section, up to 48% of our overall budget, overall revenues. Fares would be 5%. Other revenue, contract revenue, and grants, as I mentioned before, will stay flat. And then the CRISA and the future change funding would make up almost a third of our overall budget need we would get from hopefully from one-time funding. Look at the bottom pie chart. You've got the bus division and the ferry division making up about 61% of our overall expenditures in the operating budget, and then the 39% bridge. That's pretty much been the norm for a handful of years now. We are primarily a transit-based agency when it comes to expense, although, of course, the majority of our revenues do come through our transportation services on the bridge. Turning to page 66, take a look at those expenses. You give a table that lists them out by their major line items. But what I'd like to look at is that we have increased those expenses significantly from last year's estimated actuals. If you look at the bottom 2 right-hand side of that table of numbers, last year, the second to the right, far right row is the year that's ending in next month, and that would be, we expect it to end about $205 million, and the next year we expect expenditures to be about $235 million, which is a very significant increase, about 15%. And that's because as we mentioned, we're refunding and trying to expand the transit service. That's where most of that revenue most of those expenses would go into. With that, however, the budget doesn't include, as mentioned on the assumptions below, It does not include salary expenses, increased salary expenses or pay raises, COLA raises, because none of those have been negotiated at this point. It does have increases both for pension programs and for medical programs, as we do in each year, and does assume that we would be funding the positions here at the district, including vacant positions that are currently vacant now. It does include the $21 million for the capital contribution based on the projection we did 2 years ago, as we continue to fund the needs of the capital plan. Over the next, say, 4 pages, there are a number of significant expense items that are discussed in more detail. I won't go over those now, but I'm happy to answer questions for them. We have talked about them in past years, but they explain sort of where we are. Some of them have slight anomalies because of COVID, but I think they are pretty clear on the significance of those expenses, especially around healthcare and pensions and those things. Last, if you could turn to page 73, that's the table of organization, and each year, usually we have a couple changes here that we're making. This organization's living and breathing and constantly changing, and this year, we decided that there are none. And that's not that there aren't. We are in such a situation of flux that it wasn't appropriate at this time that we had any necessary changes to the table of organization. So as it is, the proposed budget contains all of the positions as you see that it had last year. Although it mentions, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of currently vacant positions as we speak. Lastly, we'll take a very short look at the capital budget, and starts on page 74. So the capital program on page 74, there's approximately 64 projects in this year's capital budget. 14 of them are new, 50 are continuing, which is pretty much the norm. Usually the vast majority are continuing. These are multi-year projects, some of them many years, some just 2 or 3 years. Looking at the expenditures, that's in the first table at the bottom. The second column to the right, second from the right is the budget. And the majority is sitting in the Bridge Division, and that's the SDS, the Suicide Deterrent Project. That's the business expenditure. It makes up the majority of the expenditures going into next year. The bottom table is the source. About 45% of the funding will come from the district, and the remainder, 55%, comes from grants. And those are shown graphically in the 2 pie charts on page 75. Now, if you turn to page 78, is our capital list. And what these are is, in a moment, I'll read the recommendations for the board item. But what this is the district has a handful of projects that it did not choose to recommend to put into the budget being ready to be implemented. However, if staff were able to get to these projects, what this list is, by the board's approval of it, would give the general manager the authority, if staff time was available, to move one of these projects into the budget and get the project started. And you can see there's approximately 9 of them this year. With that, I will say that what follows are the next 4 sections are bridge, bus, ferry, and the district. Detailed discussions of their capital projects. Just each and every one of the capital projects, the 64 mentioned, there's a paragraph in each of them in these sections. And also the budget status sections for each one. The district division status, they have a very good write-ups about how they approached the COVID year, each division, what was accomplished, what things were able to be done, and how they're going to approach next year. And so I highly recommend looking at those to get a good feeling for what the district will be doing in the details of the actual day-to-day work of the district. With that, I'd like to turn your attention back to the board item. So page 51 of your packet that the district secretary sent out was the first page of the board item. That's item 11, the initial presentation of the budget. And take a look at, just the last thing we'll do is take a look at the recommendation. As I mentioned, this would go to the board, the full board, in June, if recommended so by the Finance Committee next month. First, number one of the recommendations is district goals, project accomplishments, changes in reserve structure, changes to table organization. This particular time, there's none of those, but that you would approve all those. Number two is that there are no budgeted employee increases for employees since none have been negotiated. Number three is that $21 million capital contribution that I mentioned. Number four are several steps to make sure that the budget is accurate as possible when we actually print it in the July-August timeframe. So it allows us to incorporate, allows us to incorporate any changes that the board were to make between now and June 30th. B, allows us to carry over any incomplete capital projects into the next year's capital budget that we haven't actually included already. We've got most of them, 50 continuing, but there might be one or two more that we thought might have finished. It approves the movement of the capital list projects to the budget. That's what I just finished discussing. And the final one allows us to make accounting changes to the budget transfers within the budget to meet the demands of the board's guidelines along budget transfers. So with that, we will bring this back in June to the Finance Committee for questions and continued discussion, and then with the idea of having you recommend it to the full board at that June meeting. So if there are any questions, I am happy to take them at this point.
Well, Joe, first off, just let me say how grateful I think we all are for both you and all this putting together this budget this particular year, the amount of work behind it and everything else, with all the unknowns and all the challenges. So very appreciative, very grateful. And with that, I'll look for my colleagues if there's any questions of Joe.
Director Terry, I'll have some.
Please go ahead.
Also.
Okay. Joe, I note that both you and your comments, and I think Dennis in his introductory remarks in the budget thing, talked about the proportion of toll traffic having shifted somewhat to midday, and you described the sort of bracketing commute hours as our bread and butter. I think it's going to be interesting to watch and see whether that midday traffic remains a more or less permanent feature. It's conceivable that as work patterns have shifted, that does in fact represent a new pattern of work traffic, where people don't come into town necessarily for an 8-hour day, but for specific tasks and materials that they can't obtain over the web or practice over the web. So I would ask that we not make the automatic assumption that the commute hours not having come back up to normal and the midday traffic being somewhat higher than normal is a thing that represents a danger, but maybe it may be a permanent effect, and we'll only know that after time. On the question, I see in a few places where we've talked about the budget not incorporating wage increases because they have not been negotiated. I would hope that we do not fall into a circularity of argument so that down the road I don't hear that in negotiations we have saying, well, no, we can't consider wage increases because they're not in the budget. And that in fact, when we make the argument about wage increases, it's made entirely upon the district's current abilities or inabilities to offer them. We're kind of in a Scylla and Charybdis situation here, steering between the two. And I would, of course, in people who work for the district, their expenses, even if they've gone up in a minor way with relatively low inflation, do continue to go up. Their cost of living continues to go up. Their fuel expenses have gone up pretty radically in recent weeks. So they have needs that a failure to provide a wage increase doesn't meet. And we, as we heard from Leslie today, on a macro level in the economy, and from you, pardon me, wage stagnation is not a thing to be desired. So if we are to look at the future, I would hope that we look at every possible opportunity to pitch a little something to our employees to help their situation. And the third thing I was going to ask about was the magic 49.2 million number. It actually shows up as 49.1 in some places, and it's the 34% in others. But I think you've addressed that, and I will just express a hope that ARPA comes through and we don't have to address the non-ARPA alternative to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director. Any other questions out there?
Yeah, I've got a question for Joe. On page 48, with our deficit at 2025 at 64 billion, have you included our toll increases into those numbers?
Yes, we do incorporate toll increases into the budget discussion. We don't incorporate future toll increases. Only the ones up through the budget year itself. So in this case, through 21-22. But after that, we don't include future toll increases. No.
And when do we I know we did it for 5 years. When does that come up again?
2 more years.
2 more years. Okay, and then in addition to that, I see we're in contract for gas prices at $2.45 a gallon. That's kind of a joke in Northern California. I think I went to fill up the other day, and it was $4.50 for regular gas in Crescent City. So California is feeling it all over. But we're under a contract, right?
The 245 number you see is a budgeted number, so it's actually not our contract price. Our contracts actually are floating, so we feel the pain when the rates go up. Fortunately, diesel bought in bulk by the truckload is cheaper than what you see at the pump, so we're still okay with that 245 number. If we ever need to make a change, the board will hear about it. We were paying less than that for most of the year. We also find that even in bad years like this, when you average out a 12 months worth of sale of buying the fuel, it tends to average out a little lower than the peaks that we all remember.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Joe? Not hearing any. And again, I know this is the first time to take this in and to visit it, and we'll come back to it again as we continue going forward. So, Joe, thanks for the presentation. Thanks also again to your staff for all the hard work in preparing this and how many hours are behind it. We recognize that, recognize the task that you had to undertake as well. So if you can convey our appreciation to your staff, if they aren't on the call today, please do. And I'll think that concludes this item if there's no more questions. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item, Madam Secretary?
I have no one on the list wishing to speak on this item.
Okay. So again, this is the initial presentation of the budget. No action is required on this item. Encourage everyone, obviously, to review the budget book, as I know they will, and reach out to staff with any questions. It'll be before us again next month for adoption. So we'll move on to item 12, 13A, and 13B, which are the monthly review of Golden Gate Bridge traffic and tolls, bus and ferry transit patronage and fares, statement of revenue and expenses, and statement of capital programs and expenditures. The 3 staff reports were sent out Tuesday, separate from the packet. And Joe, you want to go ahead and give a brief report on these 3 items?
Yes, I will do that. And as sort of as a tradition in May, considering I usually pretty much have inundated you folks with financial information, is we don't make an official report on these 3 and just leave it open to questions. So, and I will clearly be talking about these 3 next month, and happy to do so. They're the next iteration, the iteration for May. I will cover them then. But if there are any questions you have on the 3 of them, please feel free to let me know and we can talk about them.
Great, I appreciate that very much. Any questions on any of those three reports before us? Not hearing any. I think that concludes the discussion on these items. And before we move on, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on these three items?
I'm going to actually check and see if we have anyone wishing to speak on these three items or also on item 15 for public comments, so that they don't have to wait until after closed session to speak. So give me 1 second.
Perfect.
We do have one speaker under public comment, so I'm going to introduce Shane Weinstein again so that he can address the committee now and not have to wait until after closed session. So, Mr. Weinstein, go ahead and make your comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Directors, I wanted to make you aware that from 4/29 to 5/14, we had weekly bridge revenue increase from 77 to 82% of normal. And let's just remember that that is the lion's share of the money that comes in, especially for transit. And I think it would be really foolish to even think that we wouldn't be receiving any ARP funding. You know, as I said earlier at AC Transit Muni, rather the district should be actively be budgeting for the estimated ARP funds, which staff has an idea of. I think it is the intent of the district to not put any pay raises or anything in, or not budget for them, so that they could say it's not in the budget. And I hope that that doesn't ring true. I do appreciate that Mr. Mulligan and staff were sending out emails about surveys, but the federal stimulus is for right now. And like I said earlier, on routes 92 and 4, we should be putting something out there with the money that we are receiving. I was just in a meeting with bus division planners, and I personally asked why the route 4, which used to leave every 7 minutes, why we don't even have one bus on there. And the answer to that is we want to wait until it's more robust. Well, we can't grow unless we're visible, unless we're out there. And I asked the question about how a 72, which comes from Santa Rosa, how did that grow? It was because we were putting buses. It was 3 trips in the beginning, and it's up to 7 trips now. The only way we were able to do that was for people to know that there was a bus coming from there. So again, I really hope that we look at labor. Labor really, they went to Congress to make sure that this money is available. It was labor that fought to start to get things back and get the economy going, not to keep this money in the bank. Riders are still getting passed up, and this money is supposed to restore us to pre-pandemic levels. These funds are intended as emergency legislation that's intended to be spent immediately, both emergency and immediate. So this is not for money that's going down the line. And I would really, really appreciate it if you kept the people who were here during this pandemic and kept this district running, that you reward them for what they're worth. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, if I could offer one brief response. This is Dennis. No
Please.
transit agency in the Bay Area has spent their CARES Act and CRISA money faster than the Bridge District. So I wish to dispel any myth that somehow we're not spending money when we get that federal relief. As Joe's budget presentation shows, it's been a significant amount, almost half of our bus and ferry budgets for the current fiscal year. And so we're spending the money faster than anyone else. Our challenge is that our revenue stream has not bounced back as quickly as other agencies. And so that's why, we're going to be dependent on ARP money for next fiscal year.
And I will add that will be taken into account as the distribution methodology comes out. And I do think the bridge has been hit first, hardest, and we hope not lasting as long, but no one knows when those numbers are going to bounce back to 100% pre-COVID, and that is the fear. So I want to thank Shane for his comments. Madam Secretary, we don't have any other public comments coming forward?
No, we don't. That was it.
Okay, that concludes public comments then on these items, and no actions are required again for the items 12, 13A, and 13B. So at this time, we'll move on to item 14 on the agenda, which is closed session. Before we do that, I again want to thank everyone for being patient during today's meeting and thank members of the public for joining us. We will be placing the public on hold for the duration of this item, and we'll reconnect the call after closed session to adjourn the meeting. Mr. Manolius, can you please take us into closed session?
Of course, Chair Rabbit, thanks so much. At this time, the Finance-Auditing Committee will meet in closed session for a conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation under Government Code 54956.9A, and this specifically deals with the case Timothy Meno versus the Golden Gate Bridge District.
Thank you so much.
All right, we are back in open session.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Manolius, can you please provide your report out, please?
Of course. Thanks so much, Chair Rabbit. The Finance-Auditing Committee met in closed session, as noted on the agenda, for the matter of Timothy Meno versus Golden Gate Bridge District, and gave the negotiator appropriate guidance as to how to handle the claim. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you for that report. Appreciate that. Since we took public comment before closed session, that takes us to the end of the agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
I think there was a motion and a second in there as well. If there's no objection,
That's the whole booth, too.
This concludes the meeting of the Finance Auditing Committee. Thank you all for your patience today. Happy reading.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Whatever time it is.
12:45.
There you go.
See you tomorrow.